What's happening? What's happening? And what I always like to say is, what's happening, blues people? If you don't know me from nothing, you know me from that statement. Every month we join here to celebrate our African American Folklorist of the month. Um, and because we have a more specific in regards to traditional and people, yet more broad in regards to understanding the complexities and connections of these particular fields and work. There's a lot of connections to folklorists, sociologists, musicologists, ethnomusicologists, and the like. And here we celebrate those of melanations that work in these fields. And today we are honoring, raising up, and celebrating someone who, when I speak to some of my boys, well, men's that are scholars and musicians, and some of my sisters that are scholars and musicians, we all tend to use this term when we refer to this woman. That's a powerful sister right there. We want to honor today Brandi Waller-Pace, who stands at the intersections of artistry, education, scholarship, and activism, embodying what is meant to be a modern tradition bearer and cultural organizer. A Fort Worth based musician, educator, and scholar, Brandi is the founder and executive director of Decolonizing the Music Room, a nonprofit dedicated to centering Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian voices in music education, research, and performance. Through this work, they have become a leading voice in the movement to transform how music and culture are taught, studied, and valued in schools, communities, and institutions. Born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, Brandi pursued her bachelor and master's of music degree in jazz studies at Howard University. And while at Howard, she performed with the acclaimed ensemble Afro Blue, sharing the stage with legends such as Jerry Allen, Carmen Lundy, Andy Bay, Jimmy Cobb, and Bobby McFerrin. This foundation in jazz and performance artistry later expanded into a deep reconnection with African American roots traditions, particularly the banjo, through which Brandi reclaimed both ancestral soundscape and cultural memory. This sounds like my scholarship that I call blues ecology. I love it. Brandi's career reflects a powerful blend of pedagogy and advocacy. A public school music educator for over a decade, they helped develop music curriculum for the Fort Worth Independent School District and served on the Texas African American Studies course curriculum advisory team, shaping the standards for the state's first African American Studies course. I love this. Their work in classrooms and communities alike has consistently centered equity, cultural relevance, and anti racist practice. As a performer and organizer, Brandi founded the Fort Worth African American Roots Music Festival, a one of a kind gathering that celebrates and amplifies the Black presence in American roots traditions. They also serve as program manager of the Oakland Public Conservatory of Music's Black Banjo and Fiddle Fellowship and sits on the board of Folk Alliance International. Their artistry spans piano, banjo, guitar, and ukulele. And they have shared stages with artists such as Jake Blunt, Kaya Cater, Allison Russell, and the Carolina Chocolate Drops. Oh yeah, we're going to keep going. We are celebrating you today. I see you over there. Beyond performance and education, Brandi is an active writer and scholar. Their work, featured in the New York Times, Music Education Journal, the Orff Echo, the Illinois Music Education Educator Journal, and the Oxford Handbook of Care in Music Education, explores themes of anti-racism, decolonization, abolitionist thought, Black feminist thought, and Afrofuturism. Their voice brings and bridges the academy, community, and stage, offering both a grounded realism and visionary, possibly for the future of music culture. Recognized by peers and collaborators as one of the most important cultural organizers of this generation, woo! Brandi Waller-Pace continues to chart new paths for justice, representation, and creativity in musical spaces. Their work reminds us that music is not only performance, it is memory, resistance, healing, and a roadmap to the future. At this point, we don't even need an applause. Let's just bring the sister on. What's happening?
How you doing? Good to talk to you after so long.
Yeah, it's been a while, yes. But based on what I just read, you're quite busy.
I'm very busy. Happily busy, but very busy.
Happily busy. That's right. So, you know what? We could start right there because happily busy infers you're doing what you love.
Mm-hmm. I always say, they're like, what would you like to do in life or whatever? And I'm one of the fortunate people that's like, I want to do exactly what I am doing. I'd love to have it fully funded, but the actual doing is like right in the center of what I want to do.
So let's start with how. How did you get here? What was the spark?
Yeah, I was teaching general music, and as you already stated, I have a jazz background. And because I came from a jazz background and not a traditional Western European music ed background, the way I approached the classroom was different. And I did a lot of just all the trainings I could possibly get, learning how to do music ed well for the kids, and also just learning how the field is. Um, that led me to understand just how narrow the scope of like what was considered what students have to know is in music ed, and how things on the periphery of that, consider the periphery, were treated. At the same time, I was gigging, and about maybe 7 years ago I picked up the banjo and started playing in string band and jamming, learning all kinds of tunes and stories, and again learned about the narrowness that it sometimes intentionally, sometimes inadvertently excluded Black folks from the music we were right in the middle of creating. So those converged, and I started doing research about songs that were in the curriculum I was using and talking to other educators. And I just kind of reached a boiling point, and a friend was like, I think it's time for you to like make this a thing. So the Decolonizing the Music Room website launched in summer of 2019, and we became a nonprofit January 2020. Shutdown happened, started a PhD program in music ed, learned a lot more just about how all this stuff functions, and also got into a lot of presenting and consulting. Got to curate a couple of digital events, and that built up my interest. And I had been building community with other Black folks in roots music, including you. And I remember there was a discussion that happened during a session at Augusta Heritage Center. And it was just, what is the work that we do integrating spaces, and what is the work we do creating new spaces? And I consider myself a space creator. So built out from there, and then the festival happened, and it's just been lightning fast from there in a way that has been really intense but really rewarding, and building up a community, this web of us who are doing all this work together.
I love it. There's so many things to unpack from this statement. So if if you ever see me looking down when you're talking, trust me, I'm paying attention, but I'm writing
Oh,
notes
sure.
for
Yeah.
particular things I want to ask you about, because there's a couple of things you said that resonated with me specifically, and I believe it would also resonate with many of our audience members.
Hmm.
Let's start with language. And the reason why I say let's start with language, because there's two folds to your statement that lives in language, right? the teaching of a Black music in comparison to a Western music, there's a different language, right?
Mhm.
But then going to higher education to learn the language, you know I'm going with this. Could you talk to us about this, please?
Yeah, and you we're thinking the same thing. And I was reading a post about this yesterday, just about how we are forced to navigate these traditional structures that are very limited, and the requirement that we are competent in their language and disregard ours essentially is like it limits how we can name our own worlds and name our own experiences and ways of knowing that extend far beyond the limits of, you know, for you and me, traditional English, for example. Um, it's real interesting. And language, you know, like you name your world and you create new language to name that world, while you also make sure to maintain a balance between, like, I'm always going, if I was teaching in a classroom, would I have any idea what I was talking about if I said this now? Not from a smarter, less smart perspective, but just like, what is someone having to do in their lived experience in their daily life, and what feels accessible to them? Um, and also, honestly, from an academic perspective, it is really easy to develop a big level of hubris about our work and what we're achieving. And sometimes language really plays a heavy part in that, and maintaining that gatekeeping and exclusion. And also, when I think about not just the literal words that limit us, but just like tonally, you know, we come from a people to whom tone is incredibly important. And so it's the kind of things you can't, like, standard English can't do that. So you and I can sit here and go, mm, mm, mm-hmm. And we had a whole conversation.
That's right.
Go to academia, be like, what are you doing? You know, it's just it's limiting, while at the same time exposing you to such an expanse of new language to describe things. But it's, what is it naming? Who is doing the naming? Is the person doing the naming actually like engaging in the tradition? So on and so on and so on.
Well, based on your response, which I 100% not only agree with, I live in. Do you think it's significant, I would say, for educators and cultural workers like us to actually learn that language? Or is it beneficial for us to be able to help our people? Because you are considered in that realm and apply
Yeah.
whatever title you're in, because you know, you apply your scholarship to your community.
Yeah.
Please.
So, this is always in flux. I'm going to say that before I answer. And it was kind of my approach as an educator. I taught primarily kindergarten through fifth, some pre-K, tiny bit of sixth grade, not too long. And I have 3 school-age children. And so, to some extent, learning that language is important, but it's really important that who you're teaching and engaging with understands the why, and understands that it's not because it's more valid, but understands the exchange that comes with it, and understands their responsibility to dismantle that. So I think in my own journey, like, I grew up first through 8th grade, I was bused in Atlanta. We started our integration program. And I went up to predominantly white schools, predominantly affluent schools. And you know, you learn a lot of norms. What is it? I can't remember now. The hidden curriculum, the invisible curriculum. I can't remember what the term is. All those things that are like coded, that you come in with language, ways of being, all kinds of stuff. And then I went to a Black Arts high school in East Point, Georgia. I'm so grateful I went there, and then went to Howard. And so since then, putting that all in context and talking to other peers of mine about just we had to code switch. And many of us are like, and now it's time to unpack that we had to code switch. So now with my own children, because I'm not in the classroom right now, like I'll tell my children this is considered standard English and this is like a colonial construct. And so you they want you to know standard English because they'll get what you're talking about and they'll consider it more professional or whatever. That's not true. It's not more professional. We have our own languages. We have our own Englishes, just like when, you see a British person on TV or an Australian person on TV or whatever. And our language has structure and meaning and depth, and really just normalizing like this is because of a systemic thing. This isn't because this is right or correct. While at the same time going, if you learn to speak this language with facility, X, Y, and Z will happen as you have to navigate this stuff that you shouldn't have to navigate anyway.
I love it. So now, before I go into decolonizing the music room, particularly because your explanations holler decolonialization, I would like to step back to the I don't want to say connection, but the jazz and Western European music, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you made a clear distinction,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it is my belief and understanding somehow, well, not somehow, but I'll just say that for now. You and I know how, but I'll just say that for now. They were able to, they as in non-blacks, were able to co-opt jazz, intellectualize it, and then kind of your navigation through jazz as a Black woman, then seeing this difference. What was the differences you were seeing? How was the musicianship, the theory? What was the differences? What were you seeing?
Yeah, so I have to say first, again, I went to Howard University. I was extremely lucky. No place is free from colonial systems and influence
Right,
and stuff like that, but I had the unique advantage of going to a school with a legacy in their jazz department that was very much about like this is a Black art form. Not exclusively Black people make it, but here
right,
is the art form, and here
right.
is, whereas we know like the schoolification, so to speak, of jazz, starting with, University of North Texas, which I spent a little bit of time at in a doctoral program, but more music ed side, has had the impact that you stated. But even within Howard, because I was a jazz studies major and not a music ed major, I got more access to the jazz part, because a typical problem with a lot of university programs is the coursework is not made to merge that way in all the programs. So there are some where, like, if you're music ed, your course load is going to force you more into Western European classical stuff. So I have to lead with that. But when I got into the classroom, what I noticed when I was training with other teachers were their approach to improvisation, whether they felt competent and comfortable with it, whether they felt comfortable engaging their students with it, but also just the improvisation of like, what am I going to do with the lesson today? Because this needs to shift and this needs to move and whatever. And I think if you get a good jazz education, it gives you so much facility for all kinds of other things. So, I talk to teachers and it's like, can I do X, Y, and Z? Do you have an arrangement for that? But for me, I'm like, well, I'll just write an arrangement for that, for, like the general music thing. It gave me that skill. And, obviously just like the canon of literature. I remember
Right.
at one point posting about Orpheus in the Underworld. I didn't remember the title offhand. And I was like, they call it the Can Can song or whatever. And a teacher was like, oh, you don't know this and this and this? And I'm like, tell me the personnel on Miles Davis kind of blue. Like the difference is not that I'm deficient and you're not. The difference is in like, what is our canon? What is our common language? And stuff like that. And I noticed that my peers who went a more traditional music ed route tend to not have had enough time to I'm just going to practice in all these different settings, improvise with other people. Once you get into a lot of the music ed training, like I did the orchestral work certification and such, and that became more, yeah, now we're improvising and creating with each other. And anybody can improvise, it doesn't have to be jazz related, right? But I realized for some of my peers, it felt more foreign. Whereas for me, I was like, oh, cool, this is kind of what we did in class. And because I was gigging here and there at the same time as I was teaching, it was really nice to be able to bring that into the classroom and say, we're learning this, and at the show here, or when I went to the jam here, we were able to do that. And it's a little bit like, we as Black people, going back to the language thing, right? Like, Black in America means you have to know that language. You have to know how whiteness functions. You have to know all that standard stuff. That is the currency that you're expected to hold. And then your stuff is what you do outside of that. So, as a jazz major at an HBCU, and I'm not knocking this, I'm saying literally, I had to do a couple of semesters of Western European classical music. Like, it was still part of the core. But the thing is, at Howard, African and Afro-American music literature is also your core. So it's not pushing you as, just that thing, but it really is a matter of, like a grander scale of code switching, like having to pull double duty with like, got to get y'all's canon because that's how we got here or whatever. And then here's our stuff. I remember getting alternately certified and taking the music test. And it's not uncommon for teachers to have to take a test more than once. But like, I remember one of the examples was like reading a score or something. And it was like, oh, maybe it was like a bass part, I don't know. But it was like, what, famous song is this or whatever. And it was like Watermelon Man, like Herbie Hancock. And I was like, oh, I'm cool. But if you are doing the more traditional program, that might be completely foreign to you.
Right.
Whereas it's like, jazz musician 101, so to speak.
Right. Wow. I love it. And I want to keep discussing that, but I want to talk about a lot of your feats and achievements. And I want to start. Now, you mentioned decolonizing the music room. And I have to be forthcoming with you. I even on some of my websites and in presentation and stuff, I use decolonize, decolonial, colonize, but I've been kind of stepping back with some of these words we use, like that, and community and different things like this.
Yeah.
I guess because I don't, what's the term they use? Every political season, there's a term they use, and it's gotten so overused. So do you think, first, before we go into the work of the organization, do you think it is actually possible to decolonize a 500 plus year system? I know that's a big question, but I think you can handle it. I know you can handle it.
And I'll first say, like, the word choice was really careful. It's always in flux. Words have meaning and context. And so there's no new invention. In fact, when I present, I say, there's not going to be a point where I go, you are decolonized now. This is like introducing to an approach that essentially we call forever work, because literally and technically we can decolonize this 500-year thing. But what it takes is why it's going to be forever work. Because, the very first thing is land back. And if we haven't made progress on that, then like nothing, right? So when I think about what can happen, which is, a little bit of like the abolitionist leaning in me and like the futurist in me and stuff, it's like, I have to have imagination more so than say what can literally happen right this second and right this moment. And I remind people, our ancestors had imagination. Our ancestors that did not know freedom had imagination, and our ancestors who weren't able to vote had imagination. I try to think of it more like that. because all this stuff is long and it runs deep, and there are so many different approaches to how they would make something different. We all know that the current thing is not it. I use that term loosely, but um, from a very literal perspective, there are some things that could very much just turn everything upside down in a way that would be scary and wonderful at the same time. But the progress toward whatever the end is right now is going to be incredibly slow, because we still sitting here on stolen land, at buying and selling it and telling people who can be on it and who can't. You know.
Right. And I mean, my focus is particularly and specifically the American South, but I think that's a global statement, what you just said.
Yeah. And it's we have our special, our unique institution and all that stuff, right? But yeah, the manifestations are all over, and in this current moment, as our nation is continuing to lean into the conquest and destabilization that allows it to have access to more land and capital and stuff, very, very much, as you said, is a global issue.
So, with that being said, and you gave us a briefing of how the brainchild of decolonizing the music room came about. Could we get not only the story,
Mm-hmm.
but the actual function of it, of the organization? What do you guys do? What are you looking to do?
Yeah.
And why did you incorporate? And this question is, I know I'm asking you 100 questions at one time, but it's, I'm impressed with your work, and I don't get to sit down and talk to you often, so I'm getting it all out right now.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot going on with the terms foundational Black Americans, ADOS,
Yeah.
Caribbeanness, Pan African, everything. What is it? Pretending. All these different things are coming out, and here you and your peoples are is like, damn them. We're all getting played. Let's just do something together.
But also, like, knowing we have unique walks, and some of the I'm glad you mentioned some of the terms that you have, because when I talk with indigenous peers and when we talk about colonial systems and stuff, there's the indigenous erasure. So there is we are the people who were here. No, my ancestors were indigenous to Africa. There are people who are indigenous still here, who trace back and have been indigenous to this land, right? And we cannot erase indigenous folks. And I talk with indigenous peers about anti-blackness with indigenous communities and how we have like all this stuff we can look at historically, but then also the fact that we have Black indigenous people who are here speaking, and Black indigenous, in the Americas, in addition to indigeneity around the world. It's like we can't step on each other like that. So on the site, there's this essay I wrote a long time ago called "Why Decolonizing," which really goes into how I feel about that terminology. And a key part of it is we have to realize what colonization did and how it functioned, and then we have to realize like what is our place within that function. So, I'm a descendant of enslaved Africans. My position is unique versus a peer of mine who is indigenous and on the land that her people have been on so far back that you can't even thousands of years, right? Or my colleague Lorelai Batiste Long, who's a key part of DTMR being what it is today, who is Filipino American, and looking into her heritage and like the double colonization of the US and Spain and Philippines, and then what it means to come over here, model minority myth, like all this stuff. It's all we are banding together, but we are not homogenizing ourselves as racially minoritized people, and we are not allowing others to do that. And we are also very focused on like the person who the tradition or history or story applies to should be at the center of it. So, I'll easily say, if you come to me about something about, I don't know, indigenous people, and I'm like, I have this experience with talking and learning and studying. I'm not an indigenous to North America person. And so now I'm going to point you to one who is my colleague, because we know that that stuff is important. So it's not as much like, bump all that. It's like, we really have to see what part is solidarity, while also making sure we're not erasing or stepping over or like furthering the impact of the oppression that our respective groups have had to deal with. But from like, like a personal stance, and I talk a lot of my peers about this, something that often gets ignored but cannot be ignored is how much anti-Blackness, which expands out into like colorism, featureism, all that stuff, runs as a through line. And how when we talk about diversity and anti-racism and stuff, and we don't specifically name anti-Blackness and the position of those of us who are like descendants of chattel slavery, then we're going to be missing out on a lot. Not just accurate experiences and learning, but also the motivations behind a lot of the oppression that was specifically framed toward oppressing Black people, and then just impacted a much further range of folks.
So let me ask you, and thank you so much for bringing that part up, particularly because, well, I'll just ask you the question. And outside of your team, have you found, even if it's not intentional, this ideology of, but I'm not Black. I'm not Black.
Yeah.
Could you talk to us about that?
Yeah. And, if we go back historically, I say the way that like race is constructed, we say, race is social construction. It has real life impact, but it's not based in science, right? And so in the United States, whiteness is like, you get property, you get ownership, even of other people, you get rights, you get to have the most freedom, most access, et cetera, right? And then Black is the grudgingly given citizenship, incredibly like demonized, dehumanized, treated as objects. And as we see today, still fighting to be treated like full human, full free people, right? And so we have other groups, and it's like you come to the States, right? And you go, ooh, look what whiteness gives me. Oh, and look what Blackness gets me. And I'm very much oversimplifying it, right? Because there's also all the pressures and the systems you navigate to assimilate, all the rewards that you get the closer you lean into whiteness, and the disincentivizing of, really leaning into your own culture. And so without, people even having to say it, the other groups that are still very much a key part of the fabric of our society are also exposed to that like false white Black binary, and they're distancing themselves from Blackness. And as
Even if they're our complexion.
And we have our own internalized anti-Blackness. And then, a whole another podcast, we can talk about like the diaspora and those different dynamics, but the unique position of Black American descendants of enslaved people in the United States makes it so that like people want to distance themselves from Blackness. And even, we see diversity efforts and such, and we can look from a colorist perspective, who they're bringing in and who they're citing is. And some of the, we can check off these boxes and be diverse without having to deal with Black folks, but very much still walk in anti-Blackness. And what did James Baldwin say? Like, if it's not named, there's some quote that's good that I can't remember because my brain is mushy right now.
I know 100 James Baldwin quotes, but only live by one, and that's walking around in rage because I'm a Black man. That's
hey, felt. Yeah, but you can see people distance themselves from that. And it, even when I present something as simple as like, I understand the label African American and its utility,
Right.
So I appreciate it, but I want to be called Black. And
Right.
I know that people avoid saying Black.
Yeah.
And even to the extent that they'll call Black people who aren't African American because it's supposed to seem like a more polite, like respectable thing.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Right. No, we could. We're gonna. I want you on a panel about the term African American, not a podcast. A panel.
And again, if someone else identifies that way, I think that's perfectly valid. But the reason that we use Black has a history of resistance, and speaks to the diaspora. And even if everyone in the diaspora doesn't feel like we're connected that way, um, the way that Blackness is framed throughout it, like for me, it's a unifier, and it tells a story that is not as specific as saying, I was born in Georgia in the southern United States, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but like serves a very intentional purpose.
No, I dig it. I dig it. I want to ask you about the brown paper bag test at Howard, but we'll get to that later.
I'm gonna go ahead and tell you I ain't pledged too, so that's gonna be like a chunk of that discussion that we gonna go ahead and pull out.
So before we move to your festival, how are you guys decolonizing the music room? What actions are you taking? What is it that you're decolonizing? I mean, you've spelled it out a bit, but I would like you to address it specifically, please.
Yeah, for us, it is again analyzing what colonization did and is doing, the impact it has, and having people who are centered in that story naming it from their particular perspective and how it shows up. And through our online resources, we have free site of resources, and we do consulting, professional development. We have some panels and stuff online and stuff. We talk about where everyone kind of fits into that and what that means for how they have to analyze it. And then we talk to educators, musicians, cultural groups, whatever, about, so now when you look at this, you need to apply this lens, and this is what you can do to start to push back or dismantle stuff. And again, we're careful to say, you're not going to get a paper at the end that says you're decolonized. That's not how any of this works.
Right.
But the approach you can have is understanding colonial structures, their impact, what people are doing within them, what people are doing to buck against them, and putting those people at the center of their own story. So something I talk about a lot as a music educator is you'll have choral repertoire, and it will be a song written in Swahili in the style of something African. It'll be written by such and such white person from Idaho or something, or somebody completely outside of the culture, or even seeing people use the reference point as like a white Dutch descendant South American composer. Like the disconnect is so obvious to me, but it's so common. So much of our work is just getting people to see the person who the tradition is about should be the one you're talking to about the tradition. And it seems pretty like direct, right?
Yes.
But it is so standard for that not to be the case. And for, whiteness to be associated with like who has authority to learn and teach about X, Y, and Z. So there's so much just like basic mental shifting that we do through our site and through our professional development. And then things like the festival, our visiting artist educator program, our symposium we have is again creating space to say, here are the people, here are their stories, here's the background, here's how you can engage with it. Make sure people get paid like they should to engage with it.
So wait. I have to jump in right there when you said make sure people get paid, because as someone who is not only a fan and a purist, but I'm actually a traditional Black music practitioner. And I know as an acoustic musician, we are looked at as novelties. So what do you think about the idea of tradition bearers being treated as a novelty, and this is part of their actual occupation and career?
Yeah, that is part of the reason I like to create spaces, because it pushes back against that tokenism. So,
Yeah.
for example, the first festival we had in person, I remember we did a panel with Reese Palmer, acclaimed country singer, and it was, Reese is Midwest black woman. I am, Georgia born and bred, now live in Texas. Jake Blunt was there. Grew up in DC. Um, Family still has land in Virginia on which his ancestors were enslaved. Kayaker, Grenadian Canadian, and just there's no way you can look at that and see us talking and have in your brain that there is a single black way to make this music, or way to live, or way to experience, or look that we have. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes just the optics alone of seeing us presented in different ways and not the only lonely pushes back against that. And then beyond that, we're actually telling the stories. And, each year it grows and grows. And so when we have spaces like that, it's not, we're not having a token or a novelty, whatever, within that space. And because the festival is rooted in old time, string band, early blues, all of that, like very heavily acoustic traditions, I feel like it serves that purpose as well. And a really big part of all that I plan for our programs is gotta get paid. You gotta get paid something decent. When it comes to things like conferences, like we have our symposium, I'm sure you've been plenty of conferences. If you present, it's like you're lucky to get accepted, and you make your way there and you're just grateful to be there. And I'm like, if I had to apply to present and y'all want me to come into this space that was white because y'all were exclusive, and now you want me to come in and diversify it, but pay to do that, that's not, no, no. So, when we run the symposium, bare minimum for us is like, you have travel, you have lodging, want to have an honorarium. And, we'd love to do even more than that, but that's like the very basic thing that people should be doing when folks are brought in to diversify spaces or whatever. And, even in my own independent artist and consultant work, I'm thinking that way as well. And when I look at pay for the festival, and when I look at how I talk about arts advocacy in the community and what, musician pay should be, um, it's such a huge issue I try to push back against. And also, one reason why I think, like, it's just, you have to be in community with other musicians, because I play with folks who are like, these folks will play for free, so we can't charge a real price or whatever. And only through like solidarity and coalition building can we get to the point where people are like, if my peers aren't getting paid, I'm not going to step in and undermine them for
Right.
free or cheap.
Right.
Which is a heavy lift, but there are so many people who feel that way, that we're starting to all connect to one another.
Right. Because there is that I do this not to get paid, but to be the vessel. And so when just to clarify, when I ask you, the question is more of those who are doing it for that reason, but it is actually a profession and it's a career.
Yeah,
Because some people pay bills based on this. You
yeah.
mentioned something. I have to dig deeper, because from the outside looking in, meaning looking at your work, following you, you bring diversity in a lot of spaces. So to use the terminology the way you just did, in the way you did it, what is the ideology on, just from a standpoint of who you are as an abolitionist, as an activist, as a scholar, musician, but understanding or receiving the messages from those who want to diversify spaces?
Ask me the question one more time so I can make sure I answer correctly.
What explain brought in to diversify?
Yeah. So we can talk about who's doing the bringing in, right? Um,
Exactly. Exactly.
um, my most like standard experiences that I think about are, we are a predominantly white led organization, historically white, And we gotta look different than that, because it is important that we look different. The unsaid part is, it's more about optics. It's more about income. We gotta name capitalism and all this anyway. Because even going back to like who does the music as a profession versus like doing it for fun. Like if we weren't under capitalism, we wouldn't even have to be, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
That wouldn't be a conversation.
we should just be able to live, right? But yeah, it's, I most often see diversity used as like, put something other in there so we can say that it's not just all us. And the other, I've seen the other be, we have a queer person and that's diverse, and that's the only lens of diversity we're looking at. Or we have one single Black person, or we have one single Latina person, or et cetera, right? It's I've seen so much diversity framed in just we're supposed to do the thing, so let's do something and say we did the thing, but it doesn't go into the depth of what is the price of entry to engage, the literal price, but also like the emotional price,
right,
the epistemological price. Sorry,
right.
I'm getting my $10 words out. Like what is the true price of engaging in these spaces and entering them, and how much power are you willing to give up, and who are you willing to give space to? I haven't seen diversity, so to speak, get to that. I've seen it get as far as we'll do an event, we'll have a person, we'll have a group of people, and the unsaid part is it has to be people that feel respectable enough to us that like they won't give us too much trouble, and
Right.
we're good.
Right. And how much? So with all of that, I'm going to throw a question in there that I believe you hinted to, but I'm going to add it, and then I just want you to take it from there.
Mm-hmm.
What could actually be discussed? How deep?
Mm-hmm. So again, we gotta name colonization, right? Which means we have to name whiteness, and we gotta name patriarchy. We gotta name heteronormative stuff and cisnormative stuff. Like we have to name the systems and structures and all these things at play. Like that has to be what we talk about. As I said earlier, we have to say anti-Blackness. We have to say ableism. We have to say transphobia. Like we have to name all these things. We have to name how we are complicit. Some of the complicity is like compulsory because we're structured, we're like forced to deal and engage with certain stuff. And some of it is just like, I don't have a problem with being complicit. And then there's some like active complicity, right?
Right.
We got to name all that. And then we got to shut up and let the people talk. Like, cishet white person, why you're leading the meeting, the diversity meeting? Why is your name first on the book? Like it's so normalized that we don't really think much of it. And it's like, oh, it's not a big deal. It really is a big deal as like a Black femme to see so much of, what I engage in happening without someone like me represented in it.
Right.
And the misinformation that comes with it. So we got to name that stuff. And then next is reparations. Because, for the Indigenous people, land back included in that. For our people, like there are scholars who are way more prolific and experienced than I am in really putting numbers to this thing. So it's a matter of numbers, and it's a matter of like how you function. And when we're changing the function of things, I hear a lot of deficit language, like, we don't want to dumb it down, or we don't want to, make it less rigorous. But that's because you're considering whiteness, intelligence, and rigor. It's not because,
Yeah.
So You got to figure out what you can do different without applying like that deficit mindset to it, and understand that like we got to throw out the deficit side, because it's like, if for generations X, Y, and Z has happened, we're not, we're not coming at the same starting point. And even when we get there, like I talked about the emotional toll, right? Like, you invite Black women into a space and let your people know, don't touch their hair, so they don't have to teach that lesson when they get there. It's like,
Yeah, you got me hitting my computer.
and so much of it is like I say in music ed, when we learn about Bach, we learn about, where he was born, what court he played for, how many kids he had, who lived and died. And then when it's time to teach about Africa, we just say Africa.
Right.
So like, we're calling stuff less rigor. How about y'all raise your rigor about the things that are not centered in whiteness? And if we really want to go into it, as some great folks I follow and work with say, it's not even just whiteness isn't the same as white people, right? But like whiteness as a construct has made white folks have to give up their individual like ethnicities and legacies and those like ways of being from generations, hundreds of years back, to gain access to this. So they don't have that stuff showing up either. We got to sit and talk about all that, and we have to be willing to invest time. Stop doing 1 hour panels aimed toward diversifying a thing or whatever. Stop doing that. And then even when you do longer, stop having no follow-up. Those who are in a position of power need to learn enough to protect and like stand in for those of us who might be subject to stuff we shouldn't have to deal with. But just like, you just got to learn like
how to navigate.
Yeah, this is like fiscal year 6, right? I'm still telling people, why does the sheet music say African song and not the language and not the people and not the area, and it's not written by any of them, like it becomes like a broken record. But again, that's one reason why I create space. The first FWAAMFest that we had in person, Justin Robinson was there, and he made a comment about like, I don't do Black folks 101 stuff anymore. My entry point is graduate level. That's it. And that's a really important point of view, is that like the expectation that like the rigor you required of us to get the degree or the licensure or the certification is the same rigor that you need to use, and not just say, oh, we don't have time. When it's not Mozart, we don't have time. When it's not, we don't have time.
Right. But you're going to have to make time at this point, because we're not playing with you.
And put up that money. And again,
put up that money.
Right? It's like, I've talked to music ed folks, and it's like, the very least you can do is it can be free. The very least, the absolute least thing you can do is free access to something that we are intentionally excluded from.
Right.
But that's a lot to unpack, and in this capitalism, it's even harder. And it's hard for me as like a nonprofit director, because we are a nonprofit, because I looked, and again, I mentioned Laura Labatiste-Long. She and I were doing a lot of the internal stuff, and we were like, what is this? Is it a business? Is it a section? It seemed to align more with 501c3, but 501c3 is still like a capitalistic system, right? So, excuse me. As a director, I'm like, how can I serve people without depending on them as a revenue stream in order to serve them? It's questions like that you have to answer, and people have to be willing to give up the power, give up the resources. We see, let me chug a little water.
Please.
We see all this waste and gross indulgence. And for those who have access to the most power and capital, y'all could lose 5% of it. Everybody could flourish, and you still have so much money that it would take 1,000 lifetimes to spend,
Yeah, Absolutely. Well, I need to ask you this because you mentioned as a Black feminist and coming in these spaces and touching hair, and you also mentioned you didn't necessarily say, you might have said protection, but this way that we can kind of be reciprocal in a safe space with each other. If it's something that I'm supposed to handle, I got you. If something you're supposed to handle, I got you. And one person in a piece they wrote, I can't remember the name. I cannot remember the name. I got that Southern thing where I said 10 words and it sounds like one. Sorry.
You good. We both Southern.
I don't remember the name of the piece, but it was a Audre Lorde piece where she was holding Black men accountable for their participation in the white male murder of the Black woman body. Could you talk to us about that in this space?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. So what I've unfortunately seen is a lot of like our black movements, Black power, all of this have forced a focus on Black without an examination of gender. So for example, like we have the Black Panthers who did incredibly revolutionary stuff, but very routinely abuse the women among the party. It would like that was a very common Black Panther involvement experience. And it's not limited to the Panthers. It's just like this is how this stuff runs. And it ties back to, again, colonization, and then stealing our people and bringing them over, and intentionally disconnecting family units and making sure we didn't even know if we could, have our own kids and our own partners. And then Black women being positioned, it was legal to rape us forever, for so long. And even though it's not technically legal now, we see what's happening. And then us being sometimes more poised to do certain types of breadwinning, going into white folks' homes, caring for their kids with more time than we could care for our own, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? At the same time, just completely dehumanizing all of us, hypersexualizing Black men, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When we look back at some of our civil rights heroes, there are some we can name that it was almost like I've made this progress and I have access to the white man's woman. Because the white woman's position is like the peak of femininity, and Black women are loud and rude and abrasive and manly and like all this just like false stuff, right? So we have that dynamic at play, and then we have like just the incredible rage. Speaking of like, you made me think of that with Audre Lorde. There's a clip that many have seen with Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin talking. Yep. And her really taking him to task, like, y'all go out and y'all smiling now for the white man and stuff, and then you come home and you do this to us. And from a place of like oppressor and oppressed, again, I talked earlier about like coming into the country and seeing what access whiteness gives you and internalizing that, right? So we all have to deal with that internalization. But then in addition, Black men knowing they are deeply oppressed and deeply maligned, but not understanding that manness and patriarchy is a powerful position compared to Black women and femmes. And just really like clinging to that. And even a lot of the things, like I have some heavy critiques for my folks who are very Afrocentric and call things like, cisgender norms, heterosexuality, women subservient to men, traditional, like our traditions. Those aren't our traditions. Those are colonially enforced. And it's not like a fringe idea. Like, you can see some amazing research and history on this. But like, not understanding the depth of the indoctrination and like the damage that was done allows us to buy further into that. And all the stuff around us, like we just eat it up, right? Like We've all internalized the welfare queen, and we've all internalized this and this and that, right? And mix that with just like the regular patriarchy, right? That is entitlement and access to women's bodies, entitlement to like being the leader and having, all of that. And then beyond that, what it meant for Black female bodies to not be our own and not even be considered like a real offense to be raped or murdered or whatever. And then we have what we have today. And I very much appreciate when I'm in community with Black men who go, like there is male privilege here as well, and it has an impact. And so, to be candid, I'm a single woman. And so sometimes like I'll talk to my friends about dating, or if it's a Black man that I've dated or whatever, and it's like something as basic as like, yeah, y'all can just look pretty and go get a drink. And I'm like, but look at the murder rate of intimate violence against Black women. I don't think those things are equal because we get a free drink, sweetie. Like,
Wow.
I've been on the phone with a Black man who was arguing me down about that until he pulled up a study from someone else that was not me or a Black woman to confirm what I was saying.
So wait, he needed validation of a white scholar?
I don't even know who the scholar was. There's no one a Black woman. But again, it's like even thinking that we know what we're talking about is, and I've noticed just the way I show up in spaces, there's a lot of assumption that, I don't know, I'm aggressive or whatever. And there's like this thing for pushback and this place that I as a Black feminist am supposed to inhabit, that I'm supposed to stay in. And it is too uncommon. Like, I feel like what we expect white people to do, perpetuating white anti-Black racism, is exactly what Black men need to do when they're interrogating maleness and patriarchy and that level of domination. It's the same. And for me, it's even more important because y'all are the ones in the house. Y'all are the family, And so like, we've got to get the family right. And again, back to creating spaces. If we are just there to be like the sprinkles that diversify a white space, we never get to talk about that.
Right.
We don't get to break it down because that conversation ain't for them because it's too micro.
Right.
They're not ready yet.
Right.
We have to be able to have those discussions within ourselves. And I've seen, you and I talked about this. We don't go back and forth online too.
Yes, ma'am.
Like the idea of like what feminism is, of Black feminism, like all that kind of stuff.
What Blackness is.
Right. And there's such an idea that like the Black struggle is a Black struggle and that's it. And when you're talking about womanness or whatever, you're splitting that struggle. No, it's because the intersection of Black and womanhood and femdom is exponentially different than being a Black man, which again, none of us are safe, right? But the difference is we are also not statistically safe from y'all. And it can be the actual harm or just brushing it off, or the complicity, or the times I've been told, oh, but that's a nice guy, or, just all this stuff. And we have to be unpacking stuff with ourselves. Like I regularly have to like check the anti-Blackness I was raised up with, and I have to intentionally do like opposite things, listen to opposite voices, people who are not presented as respectable according to white standards. Like, you have to be deep in that. And just like white folks don't want to do that with our stuff, men don't want to do that with women's stuff. We got to understand the parallels, and we got to understand that like that's work too. And then, again, a whole nother podcast on how we need to interrogate our domination over children. But that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. What I'm gathering, and correct me if I'm wrong, also, you remind me of, what you said reminded me of Thick by Tressie McMillan. Yeah, and I got that book for my daughter to read. But anyway, I read it too. But anyway.
And y'all follow her on Instagram. She's amazing. Lots of like long form and short form, just amazing.
We will at this point. What I'm getting from you is deeper than decolonizing or decolonial, but more of a call to self and nucleus than kinfolk healing,
Mhm, mhm.
addressing than healing. Am I in the ballpark?
Yeah, and kind of going back to that imagination, right? Like if we think that all exists is what we see, then you know what all can we do? Because what are we healing toward? Are we healing toward the status quo again? You know,
Hmm.
it's like the point that our country's at, right? And they're like, I just want to go back. Well, if we go back 4 years, it was still a mess.
Right,
They were still
right,
getting murdered in the streets. Like they were still putting kids in cages. Like it's, you know, it's it's
right.
more. It's more.
So let me ask you, as much as I want to keep questioning and interviewing you, I know your time is limited. So, but let me ask you this as we begin to wrap up. Who was and what was Brandi Waller-Pace as a little lady?
Whoo, little lady, like a kid.
Yes.
Oh boy, she was extremely anxious and really quirky and depressed for a lot of her childhood years. I now know I'm 41 for context. I learned in recent years I am autistic and have ADHD, and so that has meant me realizing that a lot of my things that like I was treated like I was just like wrong or weird or off are just differences. Um, but when I was a kid, not understanding there were differences, and then as I said, having so much of my schooling being among predominantly white and affluent spaces, um, really did a number on me. But I was still, always like I'm now very interested in music, very interested in art, super duper nerd. Um, and I think like if I had gone back to, I don't know, high school me, right? And I was like, look at this woman. I would have been like, are you kidding? What? What? Like I can't imagine even something as simple like going back to like misogyny that we talked about, right? Like I like now I feel like I like how I look and I like stuff about myself and I was not raised swimming in liking stuff about myself, except my intelligence when it wasn't too annoying for other people.
I understand now what you think.
And and the access that gained, and um, I think I just think back about like I said, I went to integrated school, but then went to black high school. And there are just so many like lynch points in my upbringing between public schooling and the stuff that my mom would put me in, like summertime, we back on the black side of town with camps and stuff like that, that I'm realizing now. Now that I'm able to filter everything through the lens of like, I know my neurodivergence, I know this, I know that, I know how this stuff works. Um, it's just provide like it makes me so grounded in who I am, even if things are not always happy. But as a kid, I was like tossed all over the place. And, I think as a parent now, my kids are 12, 15, 17. I think about like I've been intentional about the kind of media I show them. They can check out whatever, but I'm like, I'm pushing y'all towards stuff where you're represented. Because I remember as a kid being like, oh, black girl in the cartoon, like all this kind of stuff. I could see that I just needed a lot of like acceptance and confidence, but I was also very curious in a way that's done me really well. And a lot of the things um that were talked about me is like super weird and just don't really make sense. I'm like, oh, that's what that puzzle piece fits into now at 41 years old. I see how it helped me. Um, but yeah, little Brandy was like not really know what was going on, and but luckily had some people who I think kept me off the rails.
Yeah, and it sounds like you also, and correct me if I'm wrong or if I heard that wrong, were accessible and participated in a lot of culturally relevant I guess you say programs, right?
Yeah, and I really have to, like, my mom was the one who was fine schlepping me to and fro, right? But I was even thinking the other day, like, I remember she put me in some camp, I don't know, and we learned French, but it was from a black man with a fro teaching us
Wow.
about Francophone African countries. Now we can get into the layers of how the colonization, right?
Right.
To French was black people. You know, like there was stuff like this. I look back, I'm like, oh, that's what okay. That's where I
Wow.
got that from.
Yeah, but that's very important. That's very
Mhm.
important. Wow. So, okay, last two questions, right? Let me put this up here so people can know where to find you. Um, okay, let me just make sure I write down my last question before
Mhm.
so I won't forget. Because you have great answers and I can go all the way to the left.
I keep forgetting to finish the questions.
Okay, so okay. What would you do you title yourself? Are you a historian or you're educator? I, I know what your website says, but I want to ask you, right?
Mhm.
Musicologist, ethnomusicologist,
Yeah,
folklore, any
yeah.
of these things.
So I was really intentional about the stuff I chose on the website. I like scholar activist because I am able to engage in a bunch of different worlds and I don't feel like it's appropriate for me to specify even more. Like I could say that some of what I'm doing is folklore. I could say some of what I'm doing, you know, connects to ethnomusicology, but I'm not solidly within those fields. So scholar activist really resonates with me aside from being an educator and musician. And I did something at the Biscuits and Banjos Festival that Rhiannon Giddens started this year. And one of the labels they put was cultural advocate. And I hadn't heard that before. And I Googled and I was like, oh, that's it too. I don't think I had thought about the advocacy piece quite in that way. So I like that title as well. Um, but, you know, again, like I wouldn't call myself a folklorist, for example, because the field has some very specific things you do and processes and stuff like that, that it'd be really glib for me to be like, oh, yeah, I'm a folklorist. That's, yeah.
But you would think you would say that you do engage in some of its strategies or processes, etc.
Yeah, and for me, being like across areas is really important. So if you look at the Decolonizing Music Room site, it says we engage across music studies, and that's built completely out of my personal experience. Is that I engage in folklore, I engage with ethno folks, the presentations and work and stuff I've been doing. I get to interact with them all, but I don't know. I don't want to say like chameleon. It's just not a really chameleon thing. I just think that I am good at making connections, and I'm also really enthusiastic about finding people within the connections I've made. I feel like that has resulted in a lot of me interacting with, but not necessarily being totally in certain fields. And back to academia, like part of the issue is that they're very siloed when they shouldn't be. So that's another piece of it.
I dig it. I dig it. And I can see, and I also kind of, though I go under the guise of applied folklorist or applied ethnomusicologist, it's not. I really believe it. All of them are more fluid than separate. But
Absolutely. And
you
that's
know,
the work we got to do as far as the academy and the institutions go, right? Is that understand that like y'all know this is fluid, right? Like it's not but you know that's other work we have to do because when you're in a lot of these programs it can start to get narrow and there's so many factors around that, but
right.
increasing the understanding that this stuff is fluid and incredibly interconnected is so important.
So I'm gonna. This is my Whew, last question. I say whew like that because I have a whole more list, but I think if I stop with this question, I can get you back another time. um, what would you tell a young person, a middle-aged person, even an elder, if they're interested in what you're doing in a way where they're like, I'm not quite sure what it is I'm doing, but
Mhm.
I'm doing it because of this reason, similar to you, and
Yeah.
they want to figure out what do I do? How do I go about this? What would you tell them?
Yeah. What I end up doing a lot is like, let's hop on a Zoom call and talk about it. If you have like no idea you want to engage, I say like I have a little like tucked away, like in another dimension space for my people when they come to me, like I love to talk about this. And I'm like, I'm busy, but there's this extra space I just put aside so that we can have those discussions. Coming out to programs that we have is something I suggest, but it really is about sitting and talking, or sometimes me pointing them to different resources and such, because I'd ask them about their experiences, and then we kind of talk through where they want to go. And beyond that, it's like, what is it that brought you to want to engage with this in the first place? You know, I'd have to ask a lot about like the position they're in, because I have to stop myself. I will think of a million ideas,
Right.
but that might not be what you want to do at all. I've got to
Right.
get to a listening space and be like, here's what I have to offer, here's what I do, what are you interested in, and what kind of discussion can we have. And I've ended up making some really cool connections and collaborations that way, with people just being like, oh, I like what you're doing, I want to be involved, here's what I'm doing, and like, oh, that's great, let's talk. At any age.
Well, and where else can they find you besides these two?
Let's see. On Facebook, you can look up Brandi Waller-Pace, and my other links are really, really from these sites. I have the Facebook, the Instagram for Decolonizing Music Room for the Fort Worth African American Roots Music Festival. You can get to my YouTube from there, or just look up Brandi Waller-Pace. I'm at that point in life where like I exist on the internet
Right.
more than I used to, especially with the shutdown and us doing so much virtual stuff. Like,
Right,
yeah,
right, right. Well, I have to say, I appreciate and thank you for giving me some of your extremely small time, but that little space. No, seriously, because you do a lot of work and you should be celebrated.
thank you. It was great talking to you. So we'll have to see each other in real life sooner than later again.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, folks, I need you to go check out Brandi's work. And actually, if they want to be part of any of your festivals or whatever, is there submissions? How do they do this?
So right now, we've been making a big impact, but we're super tiny. I'm still in the place of like just shoot an email, because I have to check all the emails. And I'll be there directly. I've had some people reach out via Instagram. I've had some people reach out by email. I'm excited about a capacity building phase that we're about to head into this fall, where hopefully we'll build out more, like submission processes, or and have some additional help there.
Groovy. You heard it here first. We want to thank you. Check her out. You know where to find us. You know where to find Brandi. Please continue feeding yourself. Peace.